So we're going to talk about some substantive issues about layers of government and types of government. Some of it's stuff that people may remember from fifth grade. Some of it, hopefully, is a little more complicated than that. And then we're going to look at some just flat examples of some of the law that we're talking about, and whether it be statute or regulations or agency handbooks, just so you can kind of look at it and see what it is, in a way, instead of having it just discussed abstractly. So, and kind of at the same time, we'll try to learn a little bit about appeals, because what we'll look at for law will be essentially law about the National Appeals Division. So I'm not even really going to follow super closely to what these materials say, but just thinking from the point of view of somebody who's providing assistance for farmers, the first thing that I would point out is that the sort of levels of government, which we did in part learn in school, is actually really it's often a problem for farmers in understanding what's happening to them, and it's often somewhat complicated to figure out. And so what we're talking now is like the difference between the federal government, the state government, and other forms of local government. And what we're not going to spend much time talking about, but you just need to be aware of it, is tribal governments. And so each of those have their own narrow or not so narrow realm of authority and power. And so when somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm being hassled by the conservation people about something, a marshland or something like that, it's actually a very puzzling question at first, who we're talking about. Like who is the authority which is saying you can or cannot do something, or we will or will not give you a grant to do something. And I've sort of played around with ways to try to explain this, and it's not actually as simple as it might seem. And in some ways, I think that the first big lesson is that you need to read whatever was sent to the farmer and trace out what the entity is that we're talking about and what their power is. And again, it's not super obvious. And the thing to remember, I think, just from sort of a civics viewpoint, is that many of the authority bodies that are not the federal level get their power from state government. So a conservation district, a water district, if you're in parts of the Midwest, there are these drainage districts that will sound super weird to anybody anywhere else. But all of those entities get their authority from a state government. And so that's a layer. One of the things that I know that there's some people here that are really interested in, where this becomes potentially even more complicated, is if you're an urban farmer, you face an array of interactions with government that themselves, again, can be confusing. So we're talking now about zoning, about business licenses, about where you can you set up a roadside stand. Lee is here, and Lee used to be at Flag, and I know that we worked together on instances where immigrant farmers in the Twin Cities faced obstruction from governments that it was hard to even tell what layer of government it was, because they were after them about a hoop house, or is this a zoning thing, or what's going on. And so I think that if you're going to do assistance for farmers, it's worth really, first of all, when you're assisting them and you come up to these kind of questions, just tell yourself, this is maybe not as simple as it looks. Really review the documents and kind of go from there. And I mean, I don't think there needs to be a lot more said about that, except that it's more confusing. I'll say one more time, more confusing than it may seem. And a drainage district is a part of the state government in a weird way, but your federal rules are completely separate. And if you end up working at all on a reservation, you have another layer where the tribe has a certain level of authority. It doesn't trump federal law, but essentially anybody connected to the reservation is not going to want to pay any attention to state law, and they have good legal reasons to conclude that. But I just think as a basic point, a basic level, farmers interact a lot with local governments, and they find it very confusing to figure out who has done what and how to go forward. Any thoughts or comments on that? I mean, it seems like a basic point, but I think it does sometimes trip people up.
The farmer got approval to put a ditch in from NRCS, and he thought he was good to go, so he went ahead and did it. And then he didn't realize there's state requirements, and then the county supersedes the state end of it. So the county said it wasn't appropriate, didn't meet their guidelines, so he had to close that back on up again. And the agencies don't talk and communicate between themselves because of confidentiality. So these are some real problems that exist out there, and trying to work through that becomes quite a dilemma.
I wish I could repeat that well enough to repeat it for the. Oh, you did. Okay, you said you're on a microphone. Good. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. That is a perfectly good example of the sort of difficulties. I mean, again, what your civics class, what my social studies class is what we called it, would have called federalism, like the difference between national and state and local governments. So yeah, that's exactly the sort of problem that we're talking about. Things get more complicated, and this is where we're sort of going to spend more of our time, is talking about the way that federal government ends up regulating agriculture. And here, this is what lawyers would call administrative law. So you have the Constitution, which gives Congress and everybody sort of the authority to do what they want. And as we know from civics class, Congress and the president pass the law, and the administrators execute it, and the courts decide whether it's consistent with the Constitution or whether the regulations that they develop are consistent with the statute. I mean, that all sounds pretty simple and straightforward, but it gets, or maybe not so simple and straightforward, but it gets complicated, even more complicated, sooner rather than later. Okay. Yes, laughing with me, I know, right? So let's kind of go through what happens when we get regulations. And we're going to kind of go through it in a pretty basic way. And then what you have are, like, in the last 10 or 12 pages of your materials are examples of what we're about to talk about. And just so, if you're really going to do this kind of assistance stuff, it makes sense for you to be familiar with what lawyers have to look at all the time. And we'll talk for a second about whether this counts as lawyering or not. But you have a federal statute, and some of the federal statutes that are important for agriculture are actually kind of shockingly old and general. So farm loan programs are authorized by tiny little scraps of words put into congressional action, in some cases dating back to the Franklin Roosevelt administration. And so you have these federal programs, and let's just take farm loan programs as one. And you have some more recent things. We can think of a lot of our conservation programs, which date back to, say, the 1980s or so. And so you may have a few requirements for the program. And then what happens is that, if we're going to stick to agriculture, USDA decides to make a set of regulations or rules which flesh out what the statute says and provide the detail. And due to, again, a very lawyerly, and I won't say simple set of rules, something called the Administrative Procedure Act, which was passed right after World War II, does something which in principle is a very, very good idea and gets confusing. Basically, the Administrative Procedure Act says that if you are a government agency and you're carrying out a federal statute, you have to put your proposed rule or your proposed regulation in the Federal Register so that everybody can look at it and comment on it, with the idea being the final regulation or rule should be something that takes into account the general population's criticisms and thoughts. And it's legally required. Now, there are some exceptions to when you have to do, it's called notice and comment procedure. But in the most basic world, Congress says, let's do a farm loan program. Let's give loans to people who can't get credit elsewhere to do farming operations. Then you have the USDA and the agencies within USDA that say, okay, great, this will be the general rules for it. If you like to read the Federal Register, you can see example after example of proposed rules that for almost everything in USDA farm loan programs, the programs that we've been talking about a lot today, almost all of those rules were listed in tiny print in the Federal Register at some point. And then there was a comment period, and then they got finalized. And so one of the things that if we think of it legally that courts do is hear lawsuits where somebody says the agency's regulations don't match the statute. And that's actually what the Trump administration is facing over and over right now, is they're sort of creating regulations on the fly which arguably don't match up with the statute. So a lot of the sort of lawsuits trying to stop what the Trump people are doing are about exactly this, in a weird way, about administrative law questions of what they can do based on a statute. And this is, big and small things inside of agriculture and outside of agriculture. The next step where it really does get murky is that the USDA or other agencies, they have their regulations, but the regulations themselves really aren't actually even detailed enough to run a program. And so the agency will issue handbooks or other they can call them anything they want, sets of materials that flesh out the programs even more. So you have this almost surreal situation where a sentence or a paragraph in a statute passed decades ago can become 10 pages of regulations in the Federal Register, which did have notice and comment, can become a 400-page handbook in which, in theory, people who implement the programs piece through and know exactly what to do. And if you were in the session that I was in, which was in here just previously, we talked a lot about somebody trying to get a loan. And it sounds like, though it may not have been the case, that the person was denied their loan because they didn't have management ability. And management ability is an example of this. Management ability is something that appears obliquely in the statute, as a paragraph in the regulations, and is in 10 pages in the handbook where they describe what it means to have management ability to get a farm loan. So if you're working with somebody and they are denied a loan because of their management ability, I hate to tell you this, but one of your responsibilities is to look at that handbook and figure out, hopefully we can assume that the handbook is consistent with the regulations, but your farmer is going to get a letter that's going to say, you do not meet management ability eligibility, and then you look through this the handbook, again, God help us, right? Manageability in 10 very, poorly written pages is all that one can say, is whether or not your farmer met or didn't meet the manageability requirements on these 10 pages. And it is on that you would do, you go back to them. I mean, you go back to them and said, well, it looks like in the handbook that you're supposed to, that if somebody has gone to junior college and studied agriculture for 2 years, that they should have established manageability. And you either convince USDA you're right or you don't. And if they still say no, that's when you start talking about an appeal. And what we've just now described is the real life, I think, of administrative law when it comes to working every day with farmers.
That was one of the biggest issues when microloans first came out, the manageability. You go to, like I said this morning, you go to one office and they say, well, if you were in 4-H FFA, you got manageability. You go to another office and they say, oh, you need a mentor, you need to set up a training thing, you need to do this. So they put a whole series of things that really hard to meet that requirement.
And a classic thing that USDA did for decades was to take, I mean, this is why we have these in some ways. A classic thing that USDA did for decades was take a sort of brief and openly subjective eligibility requirement and then apply it in a discriminatory way. So, I mean, I can sit here and I can kind of make fun of 10 pages of manageability rules, but what used to happen 30 years ago would be there would be a manageability requirement without a full set of rules, and these USDA guys would just go up and down based on what they thought of you. And, and obviously, in many places that would be based on race, but, not just race. I mean, I remember thinking about, when I was in my 20s, my sisters both graduated from high school. Well, they had done, a lot, pretty much what I'd done on the farm, and both of them were athletes, so probably did it, better and stronger than I was able to do it at the time. But if they'd have walked in and if I'd have walked in after high school and tried to get a loan to expand the dairy farm, the FMHAs was called them and would have said, yeah, sure, great, Jim Carpenter's boy, yeah, whatever, and here's a loan, put your family in debt and, let's hope everybody makes it out, in one piece. But if my sisters had gone in, they would have laughed at her. I mean, absolutely no. But they would have said no manageability, or something similar, right? And it would have been a subjective thing, and how do you go about finding that? And so that's the logic. I mean, I hate to say, that's the logic of having a long set of rules. The problem comes when the long set of rules themselves kind of don't make sense and are internally inconsistent, and you're sort of back to where people have flexibility to screw over somebody that they don't want to help, and you don't have much recourse. I mean, that's a pretty cynical view of what happens out there. I mean, I know people tell me all the time, we heard it today, oh, really good FSA office, we have a great relationship with them. I'm not saying that never happens or at all. I mean, I think that's great, and I hope we have more and not fewer of those folks. But we are now talking about one of the big dilemmas in having a decentralized department over 2,000 counties, farms spread all over the country. You want a consistent set of rules that are fair and applied across the board, and it's just hard. It's hard to eat, on one hand, it's too subjective. On the other hand, you bury yourself in rules that seem almost impossible to understand. And that's the dilemma that we have right now, I mean, in the world of agriculture and decentralized USDA offices. Yes, ma'am.
Stephen, can you think of an example when you're talking about a mismatch in, poorly written rules, things that are hard to enforce? Is there like something that kind of sticks in your craw that you're thinking about when you say that?
Well, my favorite is that Does Lindsay still hear? I sort of called out Lindsay. Lindsay and I wrote some guides, some flag materials on COVID relief. And if you remember, COVID relief came out all in a big hurry. And there were Treasury Department materials about these loans that small independent businesses could get in, because they didn't have unemployment. You couldn't get unemployment because you're your independent producer. They're meant for like the people in the gig economy, but they all applied to farmers. So we wrote this guide to sort of help explain how farmers could get these loans you don't have to pay back. And the Treasury Department, we're not even talking about, somebody at USDA. The Treasury Department wrote these super long program explanations, and they were completely inconsistent internally. It'd be like, see page 2 for this, and page 2 would say, oh, the answer is X. And then you would see page 3, the answer is Y. And we just go, you would just be like, I don't know, I just don't even know what to say about how frustrating it would be trying to, I mean, you spend a lot of your time figuring out, well, what do you think they meant? Like, what were they trying to do? And so I would say with the COVID relief, there was a lot of that. If I sat down with the farm loan handbook, I have 10 marked where the last administration, we were kind of getting them to resolve some of them kind of 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, were we not? And it was sort of happening over time, but some still remain. And so, and this managerial ability, it would be an example where it was really unclear what education meant, what experience meant, that if you worked for a wage, if, there was a sort of a privileging if you had been in 4-H, but until they changed it, 4-H and FFA would count. But if you had been involved in a program at an 1890 institution, that just seemed not to count. Then we got that change. It was just like you're treading water just to fighting just so everybody can get a chance to meet what should be a relatively simple rule, like, do you have some ability? Lindsay, we have an important question that you're gonna have expertise on. And the question is there an example you can think of where a handbook provided inconsistent or confusing guidance regarding the interpretation of rules? Does anything jump out? I know you haven't been thinking about a lot about FSA rules in the last couple of weeks, but.
I mean, I feel like there are probably several of them. Inconsistent. Well, some of the handbooks, I mean, sometimes they're not updated as frequently and things change. So I think that's one area. And I just walked in, so I apologize if I'm off base here. But I know like the handbooks will often put in bold any language that comes directly from a regulation. And so one thing that I often do is just make sure that what's in bold actually matches the regulation itself, in case there have been changes. So that's not exactly what you're looking for, but that's what comes to mind in this moment.
Would you agree that they were sometimes inconsistent?
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. So we're going to talk for in a few minutes about the appeal system. And one of the things that's a question that's sort of weirdly unresolved is the extent to which, if you're denied and the handbook materials seem to say that you should be eligible, it's not 100% clear whether the appeals officers, the judges in the appeal system, will agree that the handbook itself is controlling law. So like everybody will agree that the handbook controls what an FSA official should do because it's what their directions are. But with whether NAD or actually even a court, the status of these handbook rules is a bit up in the air. And you would think after, being in a republic since 1789, that this is something we might have figured out, but the answer is we have not. So we don't really know whether these really informal, massive sets of materials that tell us what the programs actually do, we don't know whether that's controlling law or not. I mean, Yeah, lots of other things to worry about, I guess.
When you say controlling law, do you mean are the handbooks controlling the law, or do you mean do handbooks qualify at like the same standard as law?
I mean, do handbooks qualify as controlling law? Can you use a court to enforce the handbook? Or are you just sort of asking, pretty please, will you follow your own rules?
I have a question, not knowing this area of law. So do you mean that you have to, I guess, argue at the hearing case by case because you don't know if one decision is going to be binding? And is there a place where you can find what an administrative hearing decision was?
Such a good question. And I think that the question, in one way, a way of rephrasing it is the appeal system at USDA enough like the court system where if one court says something that especially a lower court, will say, oh, that's the law, we better follow the same rules. Or if it's a parallel court, will we say, well, we're trying to figure out what to do here, and here's another equal court, and they came up with some pretty good thinking, maybe we should pay attention to that. And the answer to your question is, so far as I know, there is no rule. So I'm an appeals judge, I can say management ability is X. Margaret is an appeals judge, she can say in her own appeal, management ability is Y. And so it's a part of the chaos of what we face when we're trying to do this. It's not as clean as you would hope. Does that answer your question? Like, I think the answer is we don't know. We don't know.
It does answer. And then another system that the IRS uses is that they have some type of opinion letters, right? So if you have questions about nonprofit status or things like that, you go and read the opinion letter. Does the USDA do that?
Excellent question. And the IRS is its own world legally. Those opinion letters do have more, they get cited in courts, so it's a little bit different. But in our world, in the USDA world, they will sometimes issue, even separate from these handbooks, what they call notices. And so to me, like my short answer is, if you're dealing with a USDA official, refer to all of this because it is what they should be doing. But if you are, and you should use it in an appeal, if it supports, not to be too, this is your lawyer saying this, like, if it supports your view, of course use it, but otherwise don't. But yes, you should use it, but you should be aware that the National Appeals Division may or may not think it's an important thing, and a court may or may not think it's important.
Can I add, and you can correct if this is incorrect, but one thing to that question about in the National Appeals Division, one thing that Benny is often thinking about in an appeal that he's in is if he can set some precedent with the decision that gets made, not because it's necessarily going to be binding, but because we know that sometimes NAD judges look at previous decisions. And I think, Stephen, what you were just speaking to was the chaos of whether they have to or not, but some of them do. And so getting a precedent set is generally a win in our books.
I think that's, and I think the one way to think about that is we're talking about the most legally formal thing imaginable. I mean, just so dull and so deadening, But we are talking about human beings trying to use it and make decisions. And so if you're a hearing officer and you're trying to do your job and you see that somebody else faced the same thing and answered the question a certain way, you're going to look at it and see, okay, does this make sense? And if it kind of does, it's likely to be influential, but nothing forces you to do it. And so I always think of, remember that the person reading this is a human being. They're probably trying to do the right thing, make it really easy for them to go your way. And so cite other examples, but don't assume that this is going to absolutely control.
Okay. I've been trying to mull this over so I can ask this in a way that would hopefully get an answer. But considering current day situations, we're talking about appeals here. So there's been certain actions that have been taken that have affected, I would say, probably about 95% of the people in here right now. And those actions were taken, things were removed, and some of these people were in contracts. And those contracts and things were taken, went through the courts, and they've been decided that, you know, that was the wrong thing for them to do. Yet and still, nothing has been put back in place. How do you, through appeals and everything else, get them to enforce that? And what is your recourse to that as well?
Yes. So let's take the last little piece of it first. So what happens if you get a National Appeals Division judge to say, no, Margaret is eligible for her loan, and what if USDA just says, no, we're not going to do it? I think there are two ways to think about it. One is you do get the option to go to federal court and sue and say, federal law says you should do this, but you're going to have to convince a federal judge that everything goes your way, and it's expensive and an incredible pain, and you might well lose. You don't know. And if you win, the USDA and the Treasury and the Justice Department might appeal. Like, what is it worth, right? Which is why an individual in that case rarely goes to court. You know, and if you're DuPont and you're trying to get a pesticide approved and EPA says no, you got a lot rolling on this. And so, of course, you're going to court. But if Margaret doesn't get her loan, you know, what's it all worth? I think I want to use a stronger word, but like a more frustrating situation is that to my knowledge, there's no like good answer to this, which is, let's stick with Margaret and her loan. NAD, you're the NAD officer. You say, no, Margaret should get her loan because she did show she has management ability. And USDA says, oh, okay, fair enough. Margaret has management ability, but she doesn't cash flow anymore. And therefore, sorry, we can't give her loan because she doesn't cash flow. And I mean, other people, you know, come up with probably more creative names for this. But, you know, at Flag, we tend to call these revolving door denials, where you can win every time, but every time you go back, they're going to come up with something else. And as Margaret just said, I mean, it gets, so let's say the result of the appeal comes 6 months later. Well, Margaret's financial situation just changed. And she might not actually, arguing to the rules, qualify anymore. It's possible. Well, what then, right? I mean, and it's like arguably they shouldn't make the loan if Margaret's not eligible. On the other hand, the department is the reason she's not eligible, and I don't think to my knowledge, there's no answer to that problem. So they don't even really have to say, to the NAD system, screw you, we're not doing it. They just have to come up with some other just use a legal term, half-assed reason to deny.
Sorry to keep jumping in here, Stephen.
I'm glad you're doing it. We're all trying to make it through the time period here and in good mental health.
The very same issue that Stephen just mentioned about the revolving door of denials is one that there was an administrative notice sent out about in the last administration. I think related to our work talking to them about this problem. I think it's fair to say we were related to it, but Administrator Ducheneau put out a letter that said, if you're going to send out a denial letter to a loan application, you need to put everything in there that you could reasonably know at the time that would be a reason for that denial, so that if the farmer goes through an appeal, we can address all of those issues in one appeal, because he was right. It wastes agency time and energy to go through multiple appeals when you could just do it in one. There are some practicalities of that are a little harder for the agency, like getting really deep into the cash flow parts if they are very convinced at the beginning that you're just not eligible. And that is why the agency will say we don't always include all the reasons on your denial letter. But that was definitely a positive step in the right direction for us to see that administrative notice. And Stephen, can you tell us where administrative notices fall in this hierarchy of policy?
Well, I think blue screen of a mind is what the blue screen is. I think equal to or less than a handbook, which is to say, nobody really knows. But the state office, if told about it, that somebody at a local office is not following the step-by-step rules, a good state office will say, "Hey, come on, let's follow the rules." But you have to get a sympathetic ear. You have to get somebody to want to do it. Anybody else?
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
What's the status of that policy now? Is that got in the books under?
Well, that's an interesting question, because notices expire. So again, this is arcane USDA stuff, but notices have an expiration date. And there have been times in the past where I have pushed the people who were in the administration at the time to renew notices. And they would say to me, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We're still following it." It's like, it expired. I have no legal authority to enforce this, but you're telling me don't worry about it. And it's like, I am worrying about it. So that would be what I would be concerned with, is that the notice would have expired. You just can't help but think, should this be this hard? And the answer is probably not, but I don't know what else to tell you. I'm going to take a step back here and say we're doing this, as painful as it is, because it's in some ways where the rubber hits the road when you're helping somebody deal with USDA programs. Because these handbooks are what you can use to get a local office to do what you need them to do. And again, to emphasize, just think for a second, you've got a very significant bureaucracy in USDA, the South Building and the Witten Building, and there are a lot of people in there. But the real everyday folks who make decisions about what happens to farmers are in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of local offices. And how do you get them to do what they're supposed to be doing? It's hard. And I know it's changing, and I'm not meaning to be insulting to anybody who now or ever did work for USDA. But in my experience, they're kind of farm boys who went to college, and they get these jobs, and they're pretty good jobs, and they tend to come from a political culture and tend to have the assumptions that they grew up with. And it's hard to look over somebody's shoulder all the time. And who wants to do that anyway? It's just, so I think it's, in America, it's going to be hard to have these programs carried out at a local level on a day-to-day basis in a fair and equitable way. It's a struggle. And I wish there were, I don't know what else to say. Okay, anybody else? I'm thinking we do the next step of this. I'll probably get kicked out of the concert for doing this, but I think we might stop a little early. We'll go intensely while we're going, but maybe not do a full hour and a half. Does that seem fair? I just don't want to lose anybody to passing out and hurting themselves when they hit the table. Yes, Margaret.
Since we have a little extra time, on the subject of administrative notices, if you have not read the book, The Farmer's Lawyer, Sarah Vogel describes the administrative notice that went out that told FSA to foreclose on everybody, basically. And that was something that had an incredible impact. And that is, I think, an example of the power an administrative notice can have, and which prompted a whole lot of the policy that we have now because people fought really hard for it. But that was the other one coming up in my mind when we were talking about it.
If someone wants to buy the book, Sarah is going to be at a book signing at 5 o'clock at U of Minnesota, right?
Yes, I think that's right. Of course it is. Of course it does. Yeah.
If anybody wants information, I can direct you to the community page or just pull information off of it. It is free and open to the public. It's Sarah Vogel and Sarah's.
And Sarah Vogel, if you haven't met Sarah, you should. And the book is worth looking at for sure. All right, what I do have sort of another piece here that I want to try to do that broadens the discussion just a little bit. And then as we go through, we can look at some specific examples of what these statutes and regulations look at. So what we've talked about so far is getting the department at a local level to follow its own rules. And so we're going to look at that and sort of some examples of statutes and regulations. But one of the things that I want to also follow up on are sort of two other kind of possibilities. One, which I think has come up quite recently, that's kind of an interesting thing called equitable relief. It's always kind of been there, but people didn't really use it. And the other thing is filing a discrimination complaint. And so we're not going to spend a long time on that, but I think it's just worth mentioning where we're talking now about how administrative law works, how we get the government to follow its own rules and treat people fairly. So my suggestion is we walk through these, look at a few of the statutes and regulations, and then carry it forward through a quick discussion of this concept of equitable relief and also a discrimination complaint. So if you're with me, well, let's do it. I'm going to say, let's go to these copied materials, and we're just going to look at them because I have a feeling that there are some of us who have never really had the joy of looking at exactly what a federal statute looks like and how it gets recorded and just how strange the whole thing is. So the first page that I have, that I believe you guys have too, it says page 1951 up in the upper left-hand corner. So let's just look at this together. One thing you see from the top center is that we're in Title VII. This is the United States Code. So these are federal statutes. And Title VII means that there are I don't even know how many titles. Somebody must know, 30, 40. So you have all of the federal laws of the United States that actually got passed by Congress that are in effect. They're in the so-called U.S. Code. This is Title VII. You could call it, and it's all of Title VII is about agriculture. And so what we're looking at now, if you look down at the bottom, on the left-hand corner, Section 6996, and you can go to 6997. I only copied one page just to give you a taste of it. These little paragraphs are what gives people the right to an appeal. I mean, you would think it might be set out and made clear, oh, here's an appeal system. No. You can see in heading A, down in the bottom left corner, appeal to division for hearing. And so these are largely about FSA. And so there would be a somewhat, like you couldn't use these statutes to get an NRCS appeal, but it is the basis of the appeal system at FSA. And so if you go over to this sort of right-hand column, it's Section 6997, division hearings, the case record, the administrative procedures, the time for hearing, the location and elements of the hearing. All this is the stuff passed by Congress. And it doesn't probably look like it, but let's say go to the middle of the left-hand column. You see the section that starts with a parenthesis, PUB period, L period. Those are the technical names of the statutes themselves. And so what you can see there is actually a history of the way these sections of the code changed over time. So when I read this, and hopefully it's not the way you would read it because you haven't had to. So what I see is Public Law 103-354, Title II, Section 275. So that's a congressional act that was passed on October 13th, 1994, and they have books of statutes. This is 108, Statute 3230. And then each law passed by Congress has a public name, a number and name. So this is PUB means public, L means law, 110-234. And then Title 10 is titles are like chapters, and then you get down to the section. I mean, that's literally what the law is, and this is what lawyers do. So this is why we have an appeal system. So what happens next? Feel free to jump in for any question or comment.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so for the real sickos who want to go look up that law, do you find it on
there? It's out there.
Is it on congress.gov? Is it on Cornell? Where do you go to find it?
Well,
Well, if you Google it, the way it's written, it will give you choices. You probably read.
but it is true. So what will happen if you go to the public law is you'll get the version that was passed that day and whenever it was.
Not how it's been amended since then.
1885 or whatever, right? You'll get the version that was passed that day. It won't tell you what was before or after it. It will only tell you what it did. And so what?
Shepherdizing, would it be which good is
Shepherdizing, you are a legal assistant or something. Shepherdizing is when you look at, that's right. Like I said, shepherdizing is more for cases. So that with a shepherdize is to tell you this case has not been overturned. Oh. Well, in theory, the U.S. Code is, if it's up to date, all the old public law language that got deleted out will be gone.
Because it's passed by Congress. It's not case law.
Correct. And so if you shepherdize Roe v. Wade, it goes, all the, bing, 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 reversed.
I also think that the question was, where can I find that?
So there. So there are materials that go essentially chronologically with every bill passed by Congress. But I'll tell you what, when I look these things up, it's not 5 minutes trying to figure out what actually went down to sort of and sort of tracing backwards. But we're not finished. So the next step is, we're sticking with appeals here. The next step is you have a page which says in the top left corner, 7 CFR, Part 780. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the Code of Federal Regulations. Next page, sorry. Code of Federal Regulations. So what I said, Congress passes a law, then USDA or somebody else creates regulations to implement the law and give it more specifics. We're now looking at an example of one of those regulations. And the regulation that you're looking at is USDA, but a part of USDA, Farm Service Agencies, regulations of what they think their appeal responsibilities are. So this is not NAD rules. This is FSA and how FSA, one agency of USDA, recognizes and deals with the appeal system. And so here it is. And so it's 7 USC, or 7 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. Again, 7 is agriculture, so you don't have to remember 2 different numbers, I guess. And so then we have Title 7, Subtitle, Chapter 7, Subchapter D, Part 780. Then we start with sections. That's regulations. And this one conveniently has a little index here. And what do we see that these are about but appeals? And so I cruelly left you with the second page of definitions so you can just sort of see the mind-numbing character of what a regulation even looks like. And here you have, let's look at that second page. What is an appeal? What's an agency record? This is all defined here. And so when you start reading the regulations, one very important guide to you is always pay attention to the definitions, because common sense is not your guide to what a rule means. So here, if you go, and this is something you can Google and it will pop up. It will be there. And actually, it'll be very current. I mean, in the last century, when I was lawyering and Lee was lawyering, they would issue these in books, and it wouldn't be until June that the updated Code of Federal Regulations from the last December came out. So let's say you were in September, you would look at the federal regulation, and it would be current as of December 31st of last year. So what did you have to do then? Go look at the Federal Register to make sure there was no change in the last 9 months to the Code of Federal Regulations, which won't be incorporated until next June. Lee went crazy. I found it perfectly comfortable. No. So when someone talks about a regulation or a rule, this is what they mean. All right. We are making progress here. So, I know what I wanted to show you next. So let's skip 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. And you'll come up to a series of pages that starts with, in the big upper left hand, FSA handbooks. Remember, we've been talking about handbooks? You might wonder, is there a place online that lists all the FSA handbooks? And the answer is yes. And it didn't used to be this way. You had to use the Freedom of Information Act to get internal documents from USDA, which Flagged would do every month. We would do a Freedom of Information Act request for all the new notices, internal instructions. Like thousands of people's loans could hinge on an instruction that was essentially a public document, but for all practical purposes secret, because it only existed in USDA offices. So we would do a Freedom of Information Act request. So they're at least online now. Now, I must tell you, these handbooks will be updated without any notice or go for weeks or months where the internal version used by the department changes, but they just don't get around to updating the website. And so at Flag, Lindsay left, Lindsay's seen me sob, I think, one time, and that was because we finished a big guide and they changed the handbooks without telling us, and we were about ready to publish, and I think I started crying. I don't know, Lee, did you ever see me cry over anything? No, okay. So here you have the list of FSA handbooks, and you can see kind of what they're about. I mean, and yeah. And so, interesting, what's the first one they list is appeals. So again, that's what FSA, they have a huge handbook about what they think the appeal system is. And you can just look at these. I mean, some of them are very internal, but then you go down, there's a section on conservation and environmental protection. Again, this is not NRCS. This is FSA doing environmental rules. So all the emergence FSA disaster programs are here, disaster assistance, and I didn't even include it here, but there's a whole handbook for farm loans. And you click on these and you can actually find them. And so it's a pretty bizarre system, but at least it's there. Next, you have a front page of two different of the handbooks. And so the first one you have is FSA Handbook on Appeals, consistent with what we've been talking about. I don't remember how long the appeals handbook is. It's not short. But the next one, I think I printed more, direct loan making. And you can sort of get a sense now where we're circling all the way around to management ability. So I'm now looking at the direct loan making FSA handbook front page. It's like in a foreign language, 3, FLP, revision 2. It's like, wow. But the next thing is table of contents of the handbook, and go about 4/5 of the way down to part 4, section 69. And what do we see but managerial ability on page 4-12. So remember our borrower who was denied based on, when Margaret was denied on managerial ability, we want to know what's that all about. This is as detailed as it will get within the department. And the merit of these is you get to see what their own rules actually should be. And so then I was kind enough to put into the materials the entirety of the FSA handbook on the meaning of managerial ability. And if you ever find yourself looking at this, one thing to remember is that the bolded, are you on the same page with me? Upper left corner, 69? Yep. So what's bolded is the regulation, is in the CFR. What's not bolded is what they added onto it to flesh it out. And I mean, it's just, I just don't even know what to say. Like even the examples, which are meant to clarify, you read and you just go, who wrote this? Like, is this German translated? What is the deal? But this is where you can sort of see, our managerial ability, you can see what we've come up with. Like piecing through this and summarizing it and making sense of it is like a lot of work. And people get denied loans on this all the time. And it's one of the things that along with other farm aid support organizations, we tried to get changed. I mean, I don't want to sound like a martyr, but I wrote a 25-page memo on all the ways they could change these rules and still be consistent with the regulations and the statute, but make it much more fair. Did I not, Margaret? See, I'm not making this up.
Who wrote this was
This is this is USDA. This is career people at USDA. and this is never shown to the public until it's finished. And they change it anytime they want to without giving any notice to anybody. And it's actually, the only way you'll know is the front pages of the whole handbook will have an insert that will say, September 20th, 2025, the following sections were changed. Section 61A, and they'll help, the helpful thing they'll do is in the text of it itself, they'll put little stars where they deleted something. It's hard. Well, there's Lindsay. Lindsay. You know what we're taught? You know what we're looking at is managerial ability in the FSA handbook. Any comments that you have about? All right. So I just wanted to. I mean, again, it's not everything is as complicated or weird as managerial ability, but it's not really rare either. And so you look, how many pages do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 full pages of extremely detailed rules to determine whether you have the managerial ability for a $50,000 micro loan for your urban garden where you're selling it at a farmer's market. And so when people say to you, USDA programs are not for people like me and they're a person of color, or they think, I don't want to deal with all this mess, it's like, it's not insane at all. I mean, the only thing I ever kind of want to say sometimes is, well, it's really not for anybody. but not to disagree with anybody, but it's like, wow, yeah. And so, I mean, I know people in this room that do Twin Cities urban ag stuff. And that's something that we hear all the time, that these sorts of loans and programs are not for immigrants, not for black people in St. Paul. It's made to keep us out. And draw your own conclusions, right? I mean, is this a way to make credit to have small urban farms thrive? Is this a plan to successfully do that? I mean, there's got to be a better way, but this is what we have. For a $30,000 micro loan to buy a farm implement to help you do tillage on an urban garden so you can sell at a farmer's market so middle-class people can have cheap tomatoes. Not to be cynical, good quality cheap tomatoes. Okay, on that, we're getting close to the end. So I'm going to just say two quick things here. One of the things that's happened this year is, as you probably know, and a number of you have been directly affected by this, the Biden administration USDA people created some programs using so-called CCC money or Inflation Reduction Act money. In my mind, thoughtful, interesting programs. Some of them might have had some boondoggles in them, but land access, some good programming. And the Trump administration, even though the programs had been signed and people are in progress, said, no, we're terminating those. And so I won't surprise you that at FLAG, we're trying to help some of the people that have been terminated. And one of the ways that we're doing that is with appeals, using the very system that we're talking about right now. And one of the things, a colleague of mine, who will be here tomorrow, I think, and I have been working on ways to try to appeal those denials. And I just want to give you, it's just another slice of the law that I just thought might be interesting to look at it as an example. And that's it's an old legal term, it's called equitable relief. And equitable relief just basically says that even if the straightforward rules say that you're not eligible for something or that you've broken a contract, fairness says that you shouldn't be penalized. It's just wrong. And it's just an old common law doctrine going back to, England, actually. And so we passed over a couple of these pages. And so one of the things that we're helping people argue in appeals is that it may be that the administration changed the rules for some of these grants. We think it still violates the principles of equitable relief to do it. So you're following your rules because you changed them in midstream, which may be legal, maybe not, but even if it is, it's unfair to enforce it. And that argument, which is rarely made in appeals, shouldn't say rare, not often made. When we talk to people about it, they're like, what? What are you talking about? I never heard of this. But we've been trying to help people use this equitable relief argument, and this is how you track it down. We're going to do it more quickly this time. So I have in front of me the page that says Section 7995 in the upper left-hand corner. This, again, is the U.S. Code. So this is what passed by Congress. And if you go to halfway down to 7996, equitable relief for ineligibility for loans, payments, and other benefits. And what this section says is just sort of what I was just saying to you. You may not be eligible under the rules, but you may still be eligible for relief. And if you go to the next column over under B, equitable relief, I mean, this is the sort of thing that makes perfect sense. And so no wonder it's been largely ignored. That you may be able to get relief because when you've been ruled ineligible if you meet two requirements. First of all, I'm under B, equitable relief number 1. You acted in good faith and you relied on the action or advice of the secretary. Well, that can be NRCS. Relied on NRCS to your detriment. So NRCS told you, oh yeah, sign up for this Climate Smart Ag program or some other program. You relied on them to assume they were treating you honestly, and you relied on them and it hurt you. And it hurt you, number 2, because you failed to comply fully with the requirements. Okay, that's the new requirements, but made a good faith effort to comply. So you did what they told you to do, you complied, they changed the rules. We're trying to help people argue that it's unfair to deny them. So this is a chance for you to see a statute, and it's something that's at least happening now. The last thing that I wanted to show you, how long are we supposed to go? 4:30, or it's not? 4:15, and then we have a break. Okay, well, we're going to finish in 3 minutes, so we'll still finish early. All right, we're not going to spend much time on this. So let's say we've gone through all this, and Margaret, not again to pick on Margaret, finds out that, yeah, she was denied for managerial ability, but it turns out that the requirement that they applied to Margaret, they never applied to men. Margaret, I'm going to assume
I'm a cis woman.
Gender identification is, sorry, I shouldn't say that in public, should I? How many modern rules of etiquette have I violated in the last 2 minutes? Yeah. I am really embarrassed, actually. Okay. So basically what we're saying here is that Margaret concludes that men were applying the managerial ability rule in a different way to men and women. What that tells us is that Margaret has the option to consider filing a discrimination complaint. And USDA rules say that you can't discriminate based on race, gender, etc., ethnicity. And that there's basis of that in a federal statute. There are regulations, the sort of thing that we've just been talking about. And there's one other piece where USDA provides information and materials that may be helpful to you, although can you sue based on them? It's not clear. And you'll see in your materials how to file a program discrimination complaint. And we're not going to spend much time on this. I'll tell you that it is very uncommon for discrimination complaints to succeed. Discrimination is just patently illegal. We know that the department has had difficulty in meeting those requirements over the past years. They've settled lawsuits that awarded billions of dollars to people for discrimination. And you can now file a discrimination complaint. So circling all the way back, to being denied on managerial ability, and hopefully along the way getting to see a little bit of statute and regulation, we can say that if you're applying for that same microloan, the statute and regulations and rules tell you that if you're discriminated against and the definition of discrimination is treated differently based on your race, ethnicity, gender, that's illegal and you can file a discrimination complaint. And you also are free to file a lawsuit in federal court. So, on that truly uplifting note.
I just wanted to maybe circle back to this. As a non-lawyer here in the room, you mentioned you have to be careful of lawyering as a non-lawyer. Can you explain that and talk about what that means just a little bit?
Yes.
Not an attorney.
I say that all the time.
Attorney advice. I say it all.
I say it all the time.
Assume that since I've worked in the legal field, oh, well, you're just as good or better than an attorney.
And they think it's legal advice. Yeah.
No, you may well be better. We may well be better, but it doesn't mean you're.
Yeah.
I always make sure I tell them, attorneys went to law school for a reason. Right?
That's what he tells himself.
It's a credential.
So I've been told we could get in a lot of trouble if somebody thinks you're an attorney.
Well, that's the non-funny part. Yeah. All right. So. To say,
Right. One of my attorneys used to be chairman of the disciplinary board, so that we really, really careful.
So the statute, what we're talking about here is, as you may know, lawyers get licensed. That means you have to pass an exam. I'm quite sure I almost failed it, but I felt sort of proud about that, but I passed. And you have to be licensed to practice law. And if you're practicing law without a license, it is called the unauthorized practice of law. Lawyers get very bent out of shape when they think other people might be making money giving advice when they could be stepping in and doing the same thing for a higher rate. That's sort of the political economy of lawyering licensing. But the law is the law. And what is the unauthorized practice of law? It is very, very nebulous. And so we're going to write something about this at Flag, and it's actually tricky because it varies state to state, but I think for what you're doing, it's an important thing. And so I'll just say the basics. The first thing is disclose. Now, don't pretend to be a lawyer. If there's any sort of ambiguity, make sure somebody knows that you're not a lawyer and you're not giving legal advice. I mean, I actually do that a lot because I give talks in places other than Minnesota. I'm licensed in Minnesota, but if I go to Wisconsin, I say, I'm not licensed in Wisconsin. I'm going to talk about some general legal principles, but I'm not giving you specific legal advice about Wisconsin because in Wisconsin, I have the same status as you, Wendy. I mean, I'm just somebody, right? And so don't hold yourself out as a lawyer. Disclose that you're not, and say you're not. You're not giving legal advice. And I think you can get. There's some line that can be crossed in giving people advice about the law, what the law is, but it's very hard to say what. I mean, and where this gets really. Where it's sort of amusingly interesting is where this gets fought out most with is about tax law, because accountants think that what they're doing is not the unauthorized practice of law. Tax lawyers think what accountants are doing is the unauthorized practice of law. Both make a ton of money doing it, doing roughly the same thing, so they fight about it. I don't know of a single farm advocate type person who's gotten in trouble on this front. I know of people that I believe to have been sort of on the continuum between incompetent but like trying to do good to shyster, thief, fraud. the people that I know that got in trouble, I think were way over here. I mean, they're sort of, I'm a legal assistant and here's, blah, blah, blah. And they've gotten in trouble. Are there clear rules? No, absolutely not. And I feel like at Flag, if I don't help people come right up to the edge of the unauthorized practice of law, I'm not doing my job. Like, I want you to do everything possible to help people, including understanding what the law is, and not get in trouble. That's what I'm here for, really. And so do not pretend like you're giving people legal advice. Because the question, the thing is, if Margaret, we'll stick with Margaret, tells somebody that if you get your debts forgiven, IRS will think that's taxable income, which is true. Is that legal advice? Yeah, you're talking about the law, you're giving advice. Is it some sort of level of common knowledge which, you shouldn't run stoplights? Is that legal advice? The whole thing is, it's hard to even make sense of it. But the courts do, because the courts are made of lawyers, and lawyers don't want people practicing law without a license. So I resolve at the beginning, I want to really write something that specifically for advocate types, for people doing our sort of work, that helps us get to as close to the line without getting anyone in trouble. But we don't have that yet, and I don't know that such a thing exists. Margaret.
There are some things for which we routinely refer. We don't have attorneys on staff. We know that someone is going to need a lawyer if they are going to be filing a bankruptcy. So I feel like there are some hard and fast. All right, maybe I'll back off the hard and fast, but there are some things that, like, we can help get paperwork together, but we cannot file bankruptcies for people. I don't know if anything else is like a clear one for you, Stephen, or if you would push back on that one.
I actually probably wouldn't say that way myself. I would
Okay.
say it's a very bad idea to do your own bankruptcy.
Yeah.
That it's not that it's illegal. I mean, you can go pro se. You can do anything pro se. Pro se is without a lawyer.
But doing it for someone else.
Doing it for somebody else gets tricky. I mean,
Bankruptcy is a weird debt all in itself. They have rules that you're going like, why did we still have this? So when you serve notice on the creditors, you do it, but then you have to come back and do it again. And that's just one of the weird rules. So it's always better to have someone that specializes in whether it's farmer's bankruptcy or it's Chapter 7 or 13. You know what I mean?
right. I mean, it's very.
You don't do that second mail certificate of service to everybody. That could be a technicality, I think, in bankruptcy judges' eyes.
It's just easy to make mistakes in bankruptcy, and they can be costly. And it's made more of a problem because it actually is to your benefit in almost every case, for a farmer's benefit, to plan the bankruptcy. Don't do it the day before the foreclosure sale. Even though it will stop the sale, you would have been much better to do it a month before. And also, you can sort of organize your finances in a certain way. But in some ways, it will be illegal if you do it. So, for example, if I'm in trouble and I owe Jennifer and Margaret money, and I think, I kind of like Jennifer more, so I'm going to pay her, but I'm not going to pay Margaret, and I do that pretty shortly before the bankruptcy, it's very possibly illegal. And I mean, it may be okay or it may not. This is what you need a lawyer for. And the last thing, since we're going to talk about bankruptcy, if you end up doing any work with anybody who's in a bankruptcy, the number one rule is do not lie to a bankruptcy court. This is a federally appointed judge. They do not like to be lied to, and they can send you to prison. And it has happened. So no messing around with bankruptcy. All right. I promised we were going to stop early. I believe we're not. Any other questions? This is
So, like, if we're helping a farmer and we go like, I'm not an attorney, and we keep on persisting, can we refer them to you?
Yes.
yeah. Although we are four lawyers, and so we are very likely to say we probably can't represent you. We can probably give you very general advice. And we may be able to try to refer you, which would be great, but are there enough farm lawyers out there for everybody who's got legal problems? Absolutely not, which is why we're in this dilemma. This is why we need us, why we need advocates doing something very close to the unauthorized practice of law, but not the unauthorized practice of law. Let's go, Margaret. I'm not paying your bill anyway.
Thank you, Stephen. To go back a couple topics, I just wanted to make super clear that related to discrimination complaints, that NAD, National Appeals Division, does not have jurisdiction over discrimination complaints. And if you take a discrimination situation into NAD, they'll just say they don't have jurisdiction, and whatever part of it is related to discrimination is not going to get addressed, and that is going to be really, really frustrating for the farmer. And so the question in NAD is, did the agency follow its own rules? And if they broke their own rules in the process of being discriminatory, maybe you could get that. But like, farmers need to know that NAD is not the place to successfully get your discrimination issues resolved, unfortunately.
All true. I feel like I've been your 8th grade social studies teacher on a South Park episode. So
We killed many of those episodes.
we're
Whoever wants to go.
no, I was told we have 5 minutes left, so I'm hanging. I'm here. I don't have anything else.
When you get to your South Park material, I think we know what that.
No.
Let's record it.
All right. Any other questions? I'm happy to. I think the materials have my email at the bottom. I'm happy to, if you want to follow up and have questions. If you end up, you do, this sort of assistance with farmers, the possibility of a NAD appeal is super important. It's also super important when you're dealing with USDA to understand their rules. And part of our goal here was to give you sort of a basic understanding of how to try to figure those out. So, anything else?
Yes. If you are funded through the DBAN RFA, it's important to know that you can't use federal funds to work on NAD appeals. RAFI does work on NAD appeals, and we use non-federal funds to do it. We have to talk about it as direct service providers because it is such an important part of the process to understand and know about. But it is also important to know that things that you can and can't do with federal funding, and we should not be, charge those somewhere else.
And the last thing I'll say is, so there's I know everybody wants to go. I was going to show you, I must have left it. I have a notebook which had my NAD, I just want to give you, I was going to show you an example. I have a notebook that has the statute, the regulations, people's writings about NAD. I was just going to show you. It's okay. Just as an example of what you might collect if you're going to do some of these. Anything? Pardon?
You can tell us. The NAD here.
No, I was going to say I had a binder. I was just going to pass it around to say, okay, this is what like if I'm going to do NAD stuff, this is what I use as my resource materials. So that's all right. I mean, I can show you. I think it's in the truck. So, all right, with that confusing end, anything else?
Mud.
All right.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right. All right. Good morning. Welcome to Minnesota. And if you're not from here, although a number of you are, and from Farm Aid, this is, for me, to come to Farm Aid is always invigorating. And people in this room are people that I admire, whether I know you or not. And being with you folks is always inspiring. And so really appreciate you being here. And it's just great to see everybody. My topic today is to do a little bit of a snapshot about agriculture and with just a little bit of history tossed in. We have a half hour. And so my thought is I'm going to go, I hope, about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we can have a short discussion. I'm tempted to say, therefore, like, what's the snapshot of agriculture, and how does history play a role in thinking about that? And I think you could boil it all down to farmers are really, really struggling. That's the bad news, especially the 4/5 that aren't rich. And the good news is that we're fighting back, and as we always have fought back. And there are organizations of us where we can get together and be more effective when we do that, and learn from one another and help preserve and help expand what we care about. And that's good, healthy, sustainable agriculture and the farmers that are there, all of them. So with that said, though, I do have a couple of more points that I want to make. When I say a snapshot, I guess my first thought is that we've got 2 million farms out there. And depending on how you want to count it, that means, maybe 5 million farmers, people that are taking an active role in doing an agricultural operation. And it's easy to generalize about those folks, and we will do some of it. I'll do some of it in the next 2 minutes. But it's important to recognize that people are pretty diversified in a lot of different ways. And I think what I draw from that, and I'm just going to say, I've been doing this for a long time, a lawyer, working with family farm and family farm organizations. And I think I'm just going to say a little bit about my main point today, which is that we all have more to learn if we're going to assist farmers. That we all know a lot. We all come from super important, strong backgrounds that make our work essential, but we all have things to learn. And it takes a conscious effort to do that. And to give away my sort of like punchline is that when in this world, I feel that we feel like it's so important to hold farmers up. We sometimes forget that the people who can be their best supporters and the best support for a good world in agriculture are not themselves from farms and may never farm. But a lot of them are in this room, and they're some of the most important supporters of farm advocacy and farm technical assistance. And I feel like one of the best ways that I can say that is I can just tell you like a 4-minute story of me personally. When I came to FLAG, I felt like I knew a lot about agriculture. I mean, I had grown up on a dairy farm. I knew what it was like to have a Holstein cow stand on your foot and not move. I had been a young adult during the farm crisis, and I knew people that took their own lives. At a lot of auctions, I saw the grim part, and I saw people make it through. And I felt like I just need a few more details. And it turned out that I could not have been more wrong. I went to the South to work with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and other people, and I'm walking along and going, oh, so that's what a peanut looks like. Interesting. Or I was like, you mean there are 2 types of tobacco? What is a burley tobacco? And it just went on and on and on. And And the best thing that I have ever done, if I've done a good thing, is I tried to learn from everybody. And I tried to make sense of where they were coming from. So I knew that where I grew up, the county committee people were sort of the big shots and the landowners. And when I got to Albany, Georgia, or Epps, Alabama, I figured out, oh, whoa, this system is a lot more screwed up than I ever suspected. And in my little community of 400 people where everybody was white, there were class divisions. But once I made it to other parts of the country or made it to reservations, I realized, something that that I knew intellectually, it's America. There's racism, of course. But the sort of level of it and the way that it penetrated and shaped agriculture could not have been a more important insight for me to try to get a handle on, to do work to provide assistance for people. And so I would suggest to you that we've all got a lot to know, no matter what we do know. And I think people that I have been at this the longest, Benny sitting there looking at his phone, thanks, Benny. I think Benny would agree with me that there's lots more to learn, even after you've been at it a long time. And I think there are ways to do that, and I would like to hear us talk about some of those, but I'm just going to tell you, I felt like I was Mr. Farm Boy lawyer, and I had literally as much to learn as anybody else. And the last point I'll make along these lines is, I'm going to talk just mainly about lawyers, but the two people that I know, one kind of juniorish and one, she's not here, so I'll say seniorish, that I've worked with in my life at Farmers Legal Action Group that were the most effective in their work. Neither one had any idea, I think, about agriculture when they were a young adult. Randy Roth, one of those two people, there's great stories in flag lore of Randy running around with Luann Kling in Minnesota saying, what are those little cubes over there? Well, Randy, those cubes are hay, and cows eat them. And she's turned out to be brilliant, genius, lawyer and farmer advocate. And Lindsay Keene in the back of the room with who is that, Lindsay, that you're with? Baby Dale. Also an incredibly effective advocate, and apparently she spent a little time on an Arkansas hog farm, but she is not a farmer, and she's a brilliant farm advocate and lawyer. So for those that feel like, well, I don't know if I can really do this, I didn't farm, or people that think, oh, I farmed, I know everything, you're both wrong. So that's my arrogant personal story and the lessons I've drawn from it. I'm going to just say two or three things that I think jump out at me that are underappreciated about the diversity and differences among farmers. And then I'm going to turn it over to you to tell me what you think we need to know that we may not know enough as we go about this work. So I'm just going to name them quickly. First of all, what are there, 4 of them? 5. There's more economic inequality in agriculture than we sometimes realize. It's easy to think of 2 million farms as sort of just a big mush of farms out there. Actually, just like the rest of society, it's highly unequal among farms economically. There are lots of $1 million farms. There are lots and lots of farms that really struggle, even if they're sort of in the middle of sales. And the one way that I would think about it is the Economic Research Service, which I think does a great job in many ways. Even they, maybe not, I'll say even, maybe especially they, nobody wants to admit how much inequality there is among farmers. So there's something that economists call a Gini coefficient, like measuring economic inequality. And the last time, and I looked for this, and the last time I've ever seen this written about was more than 30 years ago. And the Gini coefficient among farmers was more unequal than it was in the rest of society at the time. I suspect that's still true. A second thing that I think people assume, especially in recent years with all the political discussions is that almost all farmers have a bunch of employees. Not true. Most farmers don't hire anybody. And over about 2/3 of all farm work, the hours, are by people in that household living at that place. And so you can define farms in a lot of different ways, but what's not true is that we have a handful of rich farmers and everybody else is farm labor. And I think sometimes there is that assumption. And the people that you're going to be working with, financially distressed farmers, some of them are going to have employees, especially if they do fruits and vegetables. But we're not talking about somebody in a big house, with legions of laborers. That's not most farmers. Now, the handful of people who have a lot of money, and if I'm talking about you, I'm sorry, I think, they're the ones who hire almost all the farm labor. I mean, our target audience is mainly people doing the work themselves. I know mine is. I don't speak for you. What's a third one? A farm distress, and we're talking about distressed farmers, almost always ends up being loans. The way farmers go down, in my experience, is they have debts they can't pay. So whatever the underlying cause of inequality, of problems, of dispossession, in the end, it manifests itself in debt because almost everybody has to borrow to farm. And if you get behind, that's the way you lose your livelihood and your home. So farm crisis is a farm credit crisis, which I don't think is necessarily well understood. The last thing I'll say, and in this crowd, I think it probably, is going to not be at least so surprising, but it's always important to emphasize, is that there's a racial and ethnic and a gender diversity in agriculture, which is very much underappreciated. We should just know, I don't really trust the USDA census all that much, but let's say 10% of all farmers are farmers of color, roughly. A third of all farmers are actually women. And so just always keep in mind that that kind of diversity and the rest of all the diversity that we all care about, it's out there. Sometimes when people start talking about farmers, and I'm about to finish here, farmers as having an attitude or a worldview, I think of this, there's a great Mark Twain story where there's a two-headed person, and one of the heads of the person is a teetotaler, and the other is a heavy drinker. And I sort of sometimes think when people start pretending that agriculture that is all one, that people are all the same, it's for that to be true, you'd have to have 1,000 different sort of personalities and types all mixed up together. That's probably a confused example. It's a great story though. And I just want to say, if you've been among farmers, you've heard people cuss up a storm. You've heard people quote from, Leviticus. You've heard all kinds of stuff, all kinds of people with all kinds of interests and cares. And it's no less quirky and weird and great as the rest of the population. So I think that diversity is something that is really notable and important. I'd say that there's some consistencies, stress, feeling like you don't have enough time to do all the stuff you need to do. That starts talking about things that are common for almost everybody. But otherwise, people are a trip, and that includes farmers, and they're doing all kinds of weird stuff. So that's my snapshot, and we didn't really talk about the history, and I think the history is super important, especially, but I want to turn it back to you guys. How are we on time?
We're at 10:12.
We're at 10:12, so we're about halfway through. So what I would like to ask you folks is, if I'm talking about a snapshot here, and what am I missing? What along these same lines, what do you see and that's interesting and notable that you think that people working with farmers should know that they probably don't? And I'm looking at this crowd, and Lee, you could say something about immigrants. I mean, I'm skipping a lot, so let's speak up. What are some other things that people doing this kind of work should know that I haven't mentioned? You, sir.
Maybe it's just a question, when you identified 2 million farms, is that based on $1,000 or more of sale?
Defining a farm, is it based on $1,000 or more of sales, and then you're identified as a farm?
That's correct. So the definition that USDA uses, that the Ag Census and the Economic Research Service uses, is sort of $1,000 cutoff. But the one thing that's a little bit that's important to add to the way that you described it, it's that $1,000 in a typical year. So in other words, you have to be careful. If you were to amend that and say $1,000 every year, let's suppose you take somebody, like that, let's say has a cow-calf operation, and in December they sell $20,000 of cattle, and they don't sell again until next December or next January. Not 13 months later. That middle year, if you define it as $1,000 every year, you've eliminated them from farming. They're no longer a farmer by your definition. So the way that income is uneven, and the way that you could, I'm saying the answer is yes. That's exactly the definition I'm using. But when people say that what we're talking about aren't really farmers, you have to be careful, because there are people that have very little revenue in a single year who everybody in this room would say, yeah, that's a farmer. They're farming. They just didn't sell anything that year.
Thank you. I'll give the microphone back to somebody. I don't want to be on the platform.
Come on. I can talk more.
Stephen, I'm from Texas, and I work with a lot of small cow-calf producers. Typically, they have between 50 to 35 cows. And right now, cattle prices are just ridiculous, a record high. And some of the producers that I work with probably shouldn't be in the cattle business anyway, because they just don't have the resources to maintain a herd. So I've been encouraging those guys to take advantage of this market and sell out and retool. Sell those cows and those calves. You can get $1,000 for a 400-pound calf, which is kind of crazy. And to, use that money to build cross fences, to clear their land, and then get back in after this market changes, because it's going to change at some point. So that's kind of an idea that I had. But a lot of the guys are resistant to do that because it's more of a personal thing to them than it is a business thing. I remember when this calf was born and I helped her to do this. So it's really a personal rather than business, and it's hard to get them to change.
Great point. I mean, if we all walked out and tried and worked with distressed farmers right now, one of the things that we would see is that the only people making money are cow-calf people. I mean, everybody else is struggling, but the folks that you're working with are at least making money, and now have, as you really accurately suggest, to have to think about the way that this cycle will end, and let's plan ahead and think about what our choices are. That's a great thought. I mean, there are, by the way, when we think of cow-calf operations, that is the backbone of what's left of modestly sized agriculture in this country. Once upon a time, I'm from Missouri. There were tens of thousands of hog operations in Missouri. Now it's like under 100, and it's all concentrated. Same with poultry and cattle. Cow-calf operations are what's left for mass tens of thousands of farms out there of a modest size. And when it goes, it will be sort of the final page turned in a lot of ways.
Stephen, I think it was regarding the first quarter where there was a article about bankruptcies on the increase. I'm just wondering, your organization, are you fielding more of those type of calls? And then secondly, what is your feeling like moving forward? What's your spidey senses telling you?
Who asked this question? Oh, now I see. Okay, yeah. So I think that the actual filings of bankruptcy petitions are, to use the old line, a tip of the iceberg, in that people in trouble that are over their head in debt do other things if at all possible. But I think that when bankruptcies go up, it is enough of an indicator to say that's a something. I mean, that's something that matters. And everybody that I talk to thinks that people doing grain operations are in real trouble. Nobody's making any money, and so they're losing money on every acre. I think it gets much more mixed. This is just me. You know, when you talk about direct marketing folks, I mean, they're sort of outside of the commodity markets, and so things can vary a great deal for them, you know, one farm to another and whatnot. But I think in general, across, you know, several 100 million acres of farmland, the mainstream, you know, modestly sized farms are very largely in trouble because a lot of them are crop farmers and the prices are low and the inputs are high. It's a bad combination. That's just my sense. I would be curious to hear what other people think and have to say as well. Dairy's in an apocalypse. You know, if you're still working with dairy farmers, I'm not sure how they hung on this long, except for the really large ones. Who next?
Hi. So I'm pretty new to, I guess, this area, but one of the things that I'm noticing even as a beginner is just maybe the impact of technology and the fact that I dealt with two issues, which both had to do with technology. And one was somebody buying a reef that was it was a regular vehicle that was converted to electric, and the regulations around that, especially when you do, you know, interstate buying and everything, there were like almost no remedies. So having those type of, you know, technological impact on farming. The other one that I'm really starting to think about right now is AI. And so what's the connection between AI and farming? But the fact that there are so many data centers that are trying to be built, and it's going to take away, you know, water, electricity, all of those things, and land, of course. Yeah. So, and the extent to which the farming sector is ready to address those technological changes, right? Yeah.
Hi, I think the question was, what is it that we should know about farmers? Is that okay? So I would say, like, in the time that I've been working with farmers, and I come from a family of farmers, is that, and I think everybody in this room knows this, but that farmers and the movement is operating at the intersection of climate change, human rights, anti-racism, and that what we see in farming is, you know, a microcosm of sorts of what has. What is the history and legacy of this country? So as farmers go, that's how the rest of this country is going. How the moment that we're in is a product of all the centuries that have been in the making of this country. So again, like, it's so important that farmers, especially small scale, emerging Black and brown indigenous farmers, are the injustices are corrected, because that's how we're going to get to a place where the climate is protected, where we will have dignity and human rights. And if we don't address that fundamentally in this landscape of what we call farming, it's not going to ever happen for this country. And so for us to be very conscious about the work that we're doing, it goes beyond farming. And so that's what I think people need to understand, is that our farmers are the ones, and the farms are the places where we will see if this earth will be destroyed. It's the decisions and the financial security that farmers have. If they do not have it, and they start doing things that put the land and the water and the air at risk, then that harms everybody. So we should all be concerned about farmers, especially those small scale Black and brown farmers who have been the backbone in many ways in many communities.
I think that's two super great points. I think that one of the things that strikes me is that at this moment in this country, the struggle over race and racism and racial justice is really going on in agriculture almost more than anywhere else. I mean, we're in a funny moment where racial justice for farmers is at the forefront of change and activism and good and bad news, I'll just say, for things going forward. And like we're in the middle of the discussion, at the front of the discussion about what racial justice looks like in the United States. And similarly with climate. I mean, obviously it's a part of everything that we're doing out there, that farmers are doing, is affected by and is affecting the climate. And the technology thing I would just add, I think it's super interesting that people get tied up in technology that causes them problems. Sometimes it helps them. One thing that I always was back to my, another 1 minute of personal history, we would get these farm magazines and they would describe these incredibly beautiful, shiny machines. And the thing that I would just always think was, we are not going to be able to afford this till I'm old. And now I'm old and we still can't afford them. And so I know there are people out there that buy new stuff, but the folks that we're going to work with are much more likely to be making do with old equipment, old machinery, old genetics, old whatever, making do in ways that may not be bad, actually. So I think there's a sort of a tug of war with technology, but also some of the technology is good, some of it's not. But it's certainly a central issue, and the demand for electricity is going to soak up a lot of farmland. Absolutely, no doubt about it. And it can't all be goat pastures where goats get to hang out on top of solar panels. So, back there, you two, or you guys are organizing commenters.
I'll talk first. So this is a little bit adjacent to the prompt and building upon that very well said statement. I think farmers are farming in an exceptionally volatile time right now, and within that, I imagine there will be new nuance to farm legal challenges and understanding. We're lucky to have a few lawyers within our regional ag resource network that care about farms and offer heavily discounted rates or free rates. But this isn't what they're not farm lawyers, but they do much of their practice is not farm law. They do it because they care. So within that, are there resources or things that we can recommend that they tap into so that they stay abreast to the changing landscape and remain as helpful as they can to farmers that we serve?
So information for lawyers or information about lawyering for farmers, or both?
Information that lawyers can tap into to better serve our farmer audience within the new challenges that might be coming. So
I think there's a handful of places. So I would want to check on what Farm Commons has been doing. The Vermont Law School has a good program with some really good information that the students work on for all sorts of things. You can send me an email and I'll I'm hoping to write my little agenda up in a little better way, and it will say, hey, what should we be reading? And so Farm Commons, the Vermont Law School, there's a program, ag law program at the University of adjacent to the University of Arkansas, more mainstream, but a lot of good information. FLAG does materials, I can't help but say dry as dust, but I think useful. Details, but I think, authoritative and informative and dry as dust. And who am I missing? Farm Commons, Arkansas, Land Loss Prevention Project in North Carolina puts out some stuff. RAFI puts up, Rural Advancement Fund International puts out some stuff that's sort of legally oriented. I would read I would get online. I would get Civil Eats, the listserv. If I was going to pick one thing, it would be them for an email listserv. I bogged myself down with many, but I think that's the best one. Who am I missing? What do you guys read?
Are you ready for the next comment, Stephen?
Yes, I am. Please go.
I'm David Center, and
I don't want to be full of gloom and doom, but having lived through the farm crisis of the 80s, where we lost 50% of the family farmers in this country, we have some states and areas that 30% may not farm next spring unless there is a major government infusion of cash, which will help the biggest, richest farmers the most. But there's going to be a huge consolidation of land that's going to occur. And anybody involved in farm advocate work, and Benny over there knows exactly what I'm talking about from the 80s. There's going to be lots of family stress. And as one that drove a tractor to Washington, D.C. in '79, and one of the founders of Farm Aid, this is great that we're coming together and discussing issues and strategies that can make a difference. So I know when Farm Aid started in '85, one of the early grants established FLAG because farmers didn't have the money to hire lawyers. And y'all started giving them handbooks on here's your rights, here's what you need to file. And it helped so many farmers through the years. So I want to thank FLAG and Stephen, you, and everybody there for all these years of work. And anyway, with that.
So we are out of time. The good news I want to remind you is that people are fighting back and helping each other and working in organizations together and in solidarity. And that is the only possible answer for all of this. So let's go get them.